Continue reading from Chaitanya Shikshamrta, Bhaktivinode Thakur. And this is chapter 7. It's the last chapter. And then after this there's a summary section, but this is the last chapter. It's entitled Ras. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskitari Satarni. So this is part 1. What is Ras? Ras is bliss. Ras is an indestructible substance, an eternal substance. But the question arises, how can it be eternal? Because if it appears by cultivation of bhav, then it will have no existence before the cultivation. And if the cultivation is broken, then the ras will not remain. How can it be called continuous? The conclusion is that ras, under consideration, is without beginning and without end. The ingredients of ras, sthayi bhava, vibhava, anubhava, and sanchari bhava, are all eternal. Their relationship is also eternal. All spiritual objects have eternal ras. As much as the Lord, the soul, and Vaikuntha are eternal, ras is also eternal. Thus, the Upanishad says that the supreme object is the embodiment of ras. The soul, on attaining ras, attains bliss. The ras that the soul attains on achieving prema is the eternal companion of prema. But it only appears in certain souls. It appears when the soul discovers its eternal relationship with the Lord. Ordinary literary scholars also mention a type of ras. What is that ras? It's material ras. The subtle body that the soul accepts in the material condition has separate functions of false ego, intelligence, heart, and mind. By false ego, a person thinks of himself in a material relationship as man or woman. By intelligence, he thinks of advantages and disadvantages. By heart, he experiences happiness and distress. And by mind, he gains knowledge of material objects, becomes attached to them. Are these new acquisitions for the soul when he comes into bondage? Or did the seed of these functions already exist in the soul? The answer is that these are not new. For the soul, in his spiritual form, with individual distinction, thinks of himself as a certain servant of the Lord. This identity takes shelter of the pure spiritual form, or ego, in the soul. The intelligence also takes shelter of the spiritual form, and the heart, functioning to experience spiritual bliss, also takes shelter of the spiritual form. The mind, which brings awareness of other objects, other souls, and the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world, and fixes attention on them, also exists in his spiritual form. When the soul becomes conditioned, these spiritual functions transform into the subtle and gross counterparts due to material contact, and a manifestation as impure material functions. Thus, whatever ras exists in the spiritual realm exists in perverted form in the material world. And this is the subject of material scholars. Ras is one substance, but in the eternal world it takes an eternal blissful form. In the material world it manifests as material happiness and grief. The names, relationships, actions, process, and result are seen in the material ras, and classified by the scholars, have their pure form in the spiritual ras. The difference lies not in the varieties of ras, but in the very natures of the material and spiritual ras. Spiritual ras is eternal, material ras is temporary. Spiritual ras is excellent, material ras is despicable. The spiritual ras subject is Krishna, and its shelter is the soul. Material ras subject is beauty or ugliness of a material body, and the shelter is the contaminated material heart. The very nature of spiritual ras is bliss. The nature of material ras is happiness and sorrow. In describing ras, it is not necessary to resort to metaphorical usage of words. The direct meaning of words can accomplish the task. If that were not so, Srimad Bhagavatam would not have been able to describe the supreme ras in the form of Krishna's pastimes. Ras displays its characteristics, necessary ingredients, and rules of operation to the conditioned soul through the distorted, impure reflection of ras discussed by the scholars, taking the form of relationships and exchanges between hero and heroine, father and son, friend, master and servant. If a self-realized object does not reveal itself, then what can? Though the supreme blissful essence is distorted, the essential qualities and signs are all evident even in the material world. Thus, it's not difficult to use the direct import of words to describe ras. Those who hear about ras and desire to develop their own ras should just remember that they should not allow the despicable nature of material ras to enter into their practices. Some groups, under the guise producing spiritual ras, resort to material ras and consequently deviate from the correct path. In this way, the soul can fall from its position. Ras can only be produced in the spiritual body of the soul, can never be produced by the material body of a conditioned soul. Those who try to induce the experience of Madhurya ras by association with women are simply creating their own path to hell. They do that which is not at all spiritual and ultimately fall from their position. Those who are cultivating ras must be very careful of such people. They should not listen to the advice of pretenders fond of pleasure. Those who have attained the level of prema and are completely detached from worldly pleasure are qualified for ras. Those who have not attained pure rati and sense control make futile attempts to become qualified for ras by practicing ras. That taste which arises naturally in a person on the level of prema is called ras. The discussion of ras is only a description of how the various elements combine in the different rasas. It's not a part of sadhana. Therefore, if anyone says that he will teach you the sadhana of ras, he's an impostor or a fool. There are 5 distinct elements in ras: sthayi bhav, vibhav, anubhav, sattvika bhav, and sanchari, or vyabhichari bhav. Sthayi bhav is the root of ras. Vibhav is the cause of ras. Anubhav is the effect of ras. Sattvika bhav are special effects, and sanchari bhavs are assistants to ras. Vibhav, Anubhav, Sattvika bhav, and Vyabhichari bhav bring the sthayi bhav to the state of relishability and thus give it the status of ras. These subjects will be revealed more elaborately and precisely, but only to the degree that the sadhaka or practitioner tastes or experiences the ras directly will he be able to appreciate what is presented. Ras is not a matter of understanding, but a matter of tasting. The 2 preliminary stages of knowledge are inquiry and reception. If these are not completed, the final stage of knowledge, experiencing, or tasting will not arise. What is commonly called knowledge is either inquiry or reception, but not tasting. There's no manifestation of ras without tasting. Sthayi-bhav, permanent or constant emotional state, will be examined first. That emotional state, which in operation hold all states under its control, is called sthayi-bhav. When a person develops to the stage of bhav, and rati becomes exclusively possessive of Krishna, and becomes to some extent deep, it becomes sthayi-bhav, which is suitable for ras. This sthayi-bhav is limited to one dormant emotional mood. This sthayi-bhav is limited to one dominant emotional mood. Even when it surpasses this imitation and enters the realm of prem, it will still be called rati, as prem is distinguishable from rati by being beyond limits in all cases. Prem's nature is to appropriate the excellence of ras for itself. Rati, as it elevates itself, becomes sthayi-bhav. Whether a person who has developed rati is a sadhaka or a siddha, he's qualified for tasting ras. A sadhaka for prem, an aspirant for prem, prema rurukshu, is a person who has developed rati, but still has an obstacle to surpass. By progressing through nishtha, ruchi, and ashakti, the anarthas have gradually been dissolved. The material attachment is also gone, but as long as the subtle body remains, he still has contact with matter. That will be very quickly removed by Krishna's mercy. That contact with matter is called an obstacle. As long as that obstacle remains, the soul cannot attain Vastu Siddhi, his real spiritual platform. However, when a person with rati advances to prem, he's qualified for obtaining ras, even possessing a material body, and that attainment is called Swarupa Siddhi. Rati, in order to bring about a state of taste by mixing with the four elements of vibhav, anubhav, sattvika bhav, and vyabhichari bhav, accepts one of 5 kinds of swabhavas available in vibhava. These are shanta swabhava, dasya swabhava, sakya swabhav, vatsalya swabhav, madhurya swabhav. These swabhavas reside initially in vibhav. The subject and object between which rati operates are the 2 divisions of alambana, or foundation. These swabhavas link the subject and object. Rati accepts one of these swabhavas in order to bring about ras or taste. By the particular prowess of the Lord called his inconceivable energy, the 5 swabhavas become linked to the subject and object and create the variegated flavor of ras. In taking on 5 swabhavas, rati then becomes shantaras, dasya, priti rati, sakya or praya rati, vatsalya or anukampa rati, and kanta, priyata, or madhurya rati. According to the different swabhavas available in vibhav, rati takes on 5 varieties. In ras, vibhav is the principal ingredient, and these 5 types of rati are called principal ratis. The sanchari bhavs are known as secondary ingredients of ras, which assist the ras. Sanchari bhavs include 7 additional swabhavas. When these 7 swabhavas of sanchari bhav enter the swabhav of rati and alter that rati, 7 additional types of rati appear from those secondary swabhavas. Hasya swabhav produces hasarati, comedy. Adbhuta swabhav produces vismayarati, dismay. Vira swabhav produces utsaharati, fortitude. Karuna swabhav produces sokarati, lamentation. Rudra swabhav produces krodarati, anger. Bhayanaka Swabhav produces Bhayarati, fear. Vibhatsa Swabhav produces Jugupsharati, disgust. Actually, the main Swabhavs of Rati are only 5. In order to assist in variegated action of the chief Swabhavs, the 7 Ratis act in a subordinate way. Where a primary bhakti ras operates, one or more of the secondary rasas also operate. Though the secondary rasas have no independent existence, in analyzing them, they have the same characteristics as the independent ras. Thus, in all these secondary ras there is a taste evolved by mixing Sthaibhava, Vibhava, Anubhava, and Sancharibhava. Though literary scholars describe these as primary ras, in the spiritual world these ras take on secondary importance. In the material world it is natural that they become prominent. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu's south and north divisions, their condition and actions are described fully. In Krishna's Bhakti Ras, these 7 types of secondary ras are spotless and praiseworthy because they amplify the ras of Krishna's pastimes. The 7 rasas are included among the spiritual ras of Krishna as part of the Sancharibhavs, appearing at suitable time, like waves in the ocean of ras. They create further beauty and substance of the ras. Those who cannot understand the non-material nature of ras may object that, though some of the secondary rasas such as hasya, vishmaya, utsaha may be acceptable, how it is possible for shoka, krodha, bhaya, and jugupsha to exist if ras would have no lamentation, no fear, and no disgust. Giving them a place, the rasa becomes material. However, it can be answered that all the varieties found in the spiritual ras are productive of bliss. Nothing produces sorrow. Where in fact do the condemned material states of lamentation, anger, fear, and disgust come from? They're not independent states of the material world, but are rather reflections of elements of the spiritual world. The objects, emotions, and actions of the spiritual world are pure and auspicious, but their reflections in the material world are all inauspicious. Those qualities which produce eternal auspiciousness directly in the devotees in the spiritual world are reflected in the material world as punya, or materially auspicious qualities. Those qualities in the spiritual world which produce auspiciousness indirectly are reflected in the material world as producers of inauspiciousness and are called sin. Thus, fear and lamentation in the spiritual world immediately produce an indescribable joy in relation to Krishna and nourish the blissful nature of the rasas, while in the material world the same elements produce suffering for the souls. In the spiritual world, Krishna is the only end of all qualities or states. Material world, individual sense gratification is the objective of all the reflected states. Such a goal will produce only disastrous and temporary consequences. That which produces happiness in the spiritual world, by its contrary mood, produces direct sorrow in this world. Those whose realization of spiritual identity is still sleeping cannot easily comprehend these matters. Here the topic of secondary ras finishes and the topic of primary ras begins. When the soul has attained pure rati, after enjoying and suffering in the material world, and extinguishes the tendency to sin, he attains relief at having transcended such a fearful, dangerous place. When the soul experiences such peace, he is said to have attained Shanti Rati. When this Rati becomes combined with a sense of exclusive possessiveness of the Lord, it becomes Dasya, or Priti Rati. Thinking of the Lord as his master, the devotee thinks of himself as the Lord's eternal servant. There are 2 types of Dasya Rati. Rati derived from Sambrahma and rati derived from Gaurava. In Sambrahma, reverence mixed with submission. Derived dasya, the devotee thinks of himself as the recipient of the Lord's mercy, whereas in Gaurava, respect, derived dasya, the devotee thinks of himself as the fondled offspring of the Lord. Servants are the shelter of Sambrahma-derived dasya. Krishna's sons are the shelter of Gaurava-derived dasya. In dasya ras, the sthayi bhava is prem. In other words, rati, being nourished by possessiveness, becomes prem. Therefore, in dasya, the characteristics of rati and prem are prominent. There are also traces of sneha, tenderness, and rag, passion. The sthayi bhava of Sakya ras, or Praya Bhakti ras, is pranaya, affection. Rati and prem also exist there. The Sambram, or Gaurava of Dasya ras, matures into Vishramba, familiarity with no respect, or immovable faith. In that state, rati, prem, pranaya are strong, and sneha and rag are trace elements. In Vatsalya ras, Vishramba matures into anukampa, pity or compassion, and rati, prem, pranaya, and sneha are very strong. Rag is also present. In Madhurya ras, desirability becomes predominant, subsuming all other states such as Sambrahma, Gaurava, Vishramba, and Anukampa. The sthayi bhava is called prayati rati. As well, prema, pranaya, sneha, ranga are present, and bhava and mahabhava also appear. Rati appears according to the desire cultivated during sadhana. All the differences in rati which have been analyzed will not be discussed here, since that is not the goal of this book. Basic information to give an idea of ras is here being presented. Vibhav, causal element, has two divisions: a lamba, foundation, and utipana, stimulus. The foundation has two parts: the subject asraya and the object vishaya. The person in whom rati resides is called the subject or the asraya. The person to whom rati directs itself is called the object of or vishaya. The soul is the subject of asraya, and Krishna is the object of vishaya or vishaya. The rati under discussion may thus be called Krishna rati. When the rati attains the state of ras, it's called Krishna Bhakti ras. The stimuli, udipani for ras, are Krishna's qualities: his age, his attractiveness, his beauty, his form, his actions, his clothing, ornaments, his smile, his fragrance, his flute, his conch, his footprints, his trees, and his devotees. The outward actions by which the presence of ras is detected is called anubhav. There are 13 anubhavs: dancing, jumping, singing, anger, stretching the body, calling out loudly, yawning, breathing heavily, disregarding others, drooling, laughing loudly, moaning, hiccuping. All these symptoms do not have to appear together. One or more of these anubhavs will appear according to the nature of operation of the ras within. There are 8 sattvika bhavas: being stunned, sweating, hair standing on end, broken voice, shivering, change of color, tears, and fainting. They appear in 3 forms each: snigdha, moist, digdha, oily, and ruksha, dry. Some people include these in the anubhavas. The difference is, however, that the 13 anubhavas take shelter of one organ of the body, whereas the sattvika changes possess the whole existence of the devotee and then manifest in the body. Sattvika bhav may be said to have two states, interior and exterior. According to circumstance, the sattvika bhavas appear as dim, glowing, bright, and dazzling. Although similar, bodily symptoms may be seen in many people. Those symptoms should not be called sattvika bhava. They should be called rati abhas, sattva bhas, nishata, or pratipa. The tears of those people who worship the Lord for liberation arise from rati abhas, or a dim representation of rati. Those who are hard on the exterior but soft within experience moods of joy and sorrow in the heart without cause. These are abhasas, or dim representation of spiritual emotions, sattva. The bodily changes that occur are due to sattva abhas. Those who seem soft on the exterior but are hard-hearted may practice symptoms of ecstasy such as crying, being stunned, or having goosebumps. Since they have no real emotions at all, those symptoms are called nishattva. Those who hold animosity toward the Lord, his enemies, sometimes display symptoms like those of sattvika bhava. These are called pratipa, contrary symptoms. These are all insignificant but have been described so the person can distinguish between genuine and bogus, otherwise they're of no use. There are 31 vyabhichari or sanchari bhavas, transitory symptoms. Appearing alone or with others, they help the sthāyi bhava in the creation of ras. Using voice, existence, and organs of the body, they nourish both the secondary as well as primary ratis. Sanchari bhavas are as follows. Self-criticism, despair, lowliness, weakness, fatigue, intoxication, pride, doubt, apprehension, intense emotion, madness, forgetfulness, disease, fainting, death, laziness, bashfulness, concealment, remembrance, argumentativeness, anxiety, thoughtfulness, endurance, happiness, eagerness, ferocity, intolerance, envy, fickleness, sleep, alertness, and dreaming. Both the soul and the Lord are tasters of ras. When the soul is the taster, the Lord is the tasted. When the Lord is the taster, the soul is the tasted. Moreover, ras itself is tasted. The action of ras is to taste, and the conscious entities are the tasters. Ras is eternal, unbroken, inconceivable, and the very form of supreme bliss. The progression from pure rati to mahabhav is its upward movement. The downward movement sinks from pure rati to illusion in the material world. People of pure intelligence can realize this subject. It's not to be realized by material logic. What to speak of spiritual ras, even material ras cannot be analyzed by logic. By the subtle combination of vibhav, anubhav, sattvika bhav, and vyabhichari bhav, with sthāyi bhav, ras makes its appearance. Those who are qualified will be able to understand about ras. Those involved in material ras are not qualified for the supreme ras. And that is Chapter 7, Part 1.